Welcome to the KK Show. This is Ken.
我是凯莉。
今天我们很开心邀请我们之前在 Podcast 上面聊到的一个爱尔兰 Irish Time 的一个记者 Naomi O'Leary， 我们终于邀请她来我们的节目了。
Yeah, we're really happy. It's gonna be an all English show.
Yeah, so if you guys are worried, we're gonna put subtitle on our YouTube. So if you guys are having trouble listening to this podcast, just turn to YouTube and we'll start. Hello, Naomi.
Hi. Thanks for having me on, guys. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, just to put a little explanation and background for our audience. 所以如果大家记得的话，之前 Naomi 她在这个联合国那边，然后你讲好了。
Sorry. A few weeks ago, we saw Naomi's article writing about the UN is sending out an email telling all its staffers that try not to use the word invasion or military or war, in terms of regarding to Russian invasion. Invasion, actually, that's Ukraine, Russian invasion. I don't know how to say this without using the word invasion.
Yep.
So Naomi wrote about this, and UN came out and lashed on her, say, hey, that's fake news, stuff like that. And Naomi's credibility was like attacked, right? Is this what happened?
Yeah. So I have internal documents that show that UN staffers were instructed not to use the word war or the word invasion in relation to Ukraine. This was sent out by the UN Department of Global Communications to a staff mailing list. Probably not every single staff member of the UN received it. But that's not the only email I have. I also have many internal documents going back to the start of the invasion, which show a centrally decided policy by the UN to moderate language regarding Ukraine. So to avoid the word invasion in particular, and to use like euphemisms like military offensive. And this is part of a system in the UN. Kind of might be worth explaining how communications are set and how it works. Stop me from going on too long.
No, it's okay. Please
go
continue.
ahead. Yeah, please.
Because Taiwan is not in the UN, so we don't know anything about UN.
So essentially, the staffers for the UN are like international civil servants, right? They're international diplomats. And they're not supposed to take the sides of nation states who are members. When they join, they have to agree to all sorts of standards to do with confidentiality and to follow instructions and all this kind of thing. This is really important. And as part of this, communications in the UN are very strictly regulated. And there's actually like a central communications office that draws up the kind of language that public-facing UN staffers should use regarding any crisis, not just Ukraine. They call these like speaking points or a phrase like that. They get drawn up centrally and then they get disseminated throughout the UN, which is quite a complex organization. It's actually different agencies. There's like, agencies to do with food, agencies to do with development, human rights, different offices. So it can be a little bit uneven how these messages get sent out, but that's the typical pattern. They're decided centrally and then disseminated out through staff. And so what happened in this case is right after the invasion, according to the documents that I have, the office of the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, decided that the word invasion shouldn't be used and that the word military offensive should be used instead. That's according to an internal email that I have from the UN explaining this kind of communications policy. And that was right after the invasion, I think 25th or 26th of February. The important context to know is that Russia is a really powerful member of the UN. It sits on its Permanent Security Council. And Russia also had a policy of not using the word war or invasion at the start of the war. What it's doing in Ukraine is a special military operation, and that was enforced by the Russian government on media. So it was like obligatory to call it that way. So there's a special political context to this. Then if you look at the talking points that were provided to senior UN staff and to public-facing spokespeople and so on about Ukraine, they are in line with that guidance. So they talk about conflict. They use words like conflict, situation, things like that. They don't say invasion. Sometimes they say war, but only used in a general sense, like many children die in war, not talking about a specific war. So I have documents that show that this was the case going on for some time until March 7th. There was a specific email. During this time, staffers had received various communications warning them about moderating their language. So telling them to be careful on social media, not to appear one-sided in the war, general advice like that. But then on March 7th came a very specific instruction from the Department of Global Communications, and laid out specifically, do not use the word war or invasion, that this was the policy they were told to follow, and also not to do things like put the Ukrainian flag in their bio. So what happened then was, I think UN staffers were really shocked at that, because it seemed to echo too closely what the Russian government wanted, in terms of having these rules about what you can refer to.
It sounds like they are taking sides with Russia.
Yeah, it sounds like they're taking sides.
Yeah.
The email came my way as part of, a staff reaction to this, which was they were very upset. I began to write a story, and I approached the UN for comment. And then very quickly, in the hours after that, going into March 8th, that advice was retracted. So a fresh email went out saying, never mind, because I think it was seen, there was a realization that this was a political error. Even if it was policy, to state it like that in black and white was going to upset staff, and there was a potential to embarrass the UN. I guess the broader context is that the UN is trying to maintain relations with different powerful member states in order to do its important work, like getting food to people and trying to save people's lives, that's its aim. But the concern is among staff that in doing that, in recent years, there's been too much of a compromise with authoritarian states, and that this is another example of that. That's the fears that staffers have, that, the purpose of the UN is to do things like prevent war. But if we can't even use the word war, if we can't even describe an invasion in the terms of what's actually happening, then that favors who? It favors the invader.
Yeah.
So then there was the whole UN response to my story, which is another chapter.
Yeah, because this is how we actually found out about this, is UN's reaction to your article, right? The spokesperson for the UN actually came out and say this is not true.
And you are spreading fake news.
And then somehow some other fact-checking website also label your article as fake news without doing any actual real fact-checking themselves. And we don't know if those websites are real or they have other motivations for doing this. Do you have any follow-up stories for your story, actually?
Yeah. So in the immediate aftermath, the communications response from the UN was pretty aggressive. They said, this is not the case. And their official spokesperson account did say that the story was fake, quote, fake. Other influential accounts, particularly on Twitter, began to say that it was a fake news story. And then subsequently, the story changed from the UN spokesperson office. And they actually accepted that, this email was real. This email was really sent out. The one instructing staff not to use war or invasion. So they reversed their previous position, which is that it was fake or something. And now they started to say, it's real. We accept that. But they were minimizing it. So they were saying it's a regional office. It only went to a few staff. It wasn't centrally decided or something like that. It's not policy, they would say.
How long did it take for them to change their stance?
I guess a few hours, something like that.
Oh, that was faster than we expected.
I imagine they found the email or something like that, and maybe they didn't know about it to begin with. But I think the diminishment of this as an act of a regional office is misleading, because it's the Department of Global Communications. It's a senior person. This is the standard way that communication guidelines are sent to staffers. This was very normal procedure. And also, as I've laid out, it's not just one email. That was just the most explicit in a whole chain of this guidance, which clearly had the same aim, which is trying to keep staffers from using what they thought would be controversial language about Ukraine. So the effect of a powerful, influential, respected organization like the UN calling a story fake, that caused fact-checking websites to start to rate the claim as fake, even though it's not fake, it's true. I mean, I literally have the internal emails. And I was always open about this. I mean, I posted screenshots on Twitter from the very beginning showing the evidence that I have. It's not a claim that I'm sort of basing, you just have to trust me. I've actually put screenshots up from the very beginning so people can verify it if they want. And what I was really shocked about is the fact-checking websites that started to rate it as fake. They never asked me. They never came to me and said, hey, can we see your email? There was no fact-checking done as far as I could see. They just saw the denial from the UN and accepted it, which doesn't correspond to the reality of what reporting should be. Powerful institutions deny things that are embarrassing all the time. It's standard practice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're dealing with Chinese government all the time. They deny everything, even our existence.
So I mean, did they ever apologize to you?
Yeah, did they change the rating on the article?
You're a journalist. The credibility is really important.
Credibility is important. I have not received any kind of apology from the UN, but I'm glad that they came to acknowledge that the email was real, and they also deleted their tweet that's called My Story Fake. So that's something. The fact-checking websites actually approached the first one, Snopes, which gave it a fake rating. I found the author of the article, reached out directly to her, and I said, listen, I'm happy to share my evidence. It's actually true. So you want to have a look, And then subsequent to that, they revised their story that they had, and they put it as, I think the rating is now mixed, and it's mixed based on, so they define it as, like I exaggerated it, like I said it was, one claim to all staff that they were banned, and that it was only a regional office, so it's sort of partly true, which kind of buys into this UN narrative that it was like a rogue act and it wasn't official policy, but it totally ignores all of the other documentation that I have that shows that this was part of a policy. And actually, in response to the UN reaction, and that particularly the statement of the spokesman that it was fake, more staffers came forward to me outraged because they were like, we know this is true. We received this email and we can't believe that our spokesperson is attacking you on Twitter and throwing around the word fake when we have, authoritarian regimes calling things fake news. And this term shouldn't be used lightly, this fake news label, especially if, this is good investigative reporting. This is solid. This is based on documents. This is what democracy is about. This is about holding institutions to account and helping them to be better. We all actually have the same common aim here, which is we want functioning institutions, and that requires a free press to hold them to account.
Wow.
Yeah. So when that happened, the UN incident, did Irish Times, your employer, support you?
Absolutely. I mean, they know that the story is rock solid. It was always just based on the evidence that I have, the documents that I have. So, yeah, my newspaper has been fully behind me.
Yeah, but initially in the article, in the follow-up article, you said that a lot of other journalists have initially retweeted your news, right? And then they took it down afterward, after they saw what the UN spokesperson posted. And then they apologized to their readers or their followers, saying that, I didn't do my homework and stuff like that. And you reach out to those journalists saying that, hey, I have the evidence. Did they apologize to you and post back the article, or they just ignore whatever happens after?
I think the context of this is that people are very watchful for fake news at the moment. And there's a great public interest in not posting fake news. So when the authority of the UN declared a story to be fake, you had many individual internet users, just ordinary members of the public, who, where they would see that story, they would say, it's fake, delete it. So there was actually sort of public demand for people to delete my story. And some journalists responded by saying, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize the UN has called this fake and deleting it. But then, as you say, I got follow-up documents, I posted a follow-up story. I mean, the story is true. So I began to then reply to them and say, here's the evidence. You can ask me for it. I'm happy to share it with you. And here's my follow-up story with more UN staffers backing up what I've reported. Yeah. I had one particularly prominent Washington correspondent then retweeted my follow-up story saying, the Irish Times is sticking by what it reports or something like that. But many others did not reply, so there was just sort of no acknowledgement. I think part of the tactic that powerful organizations know about sort of, if you come out really, really strong, really fighting and say this is not true at the beginning, enough people will just move on with that sort of doubt implanted in their mind that it can kill the story. It can stop it from going any further because it just seems a bit messy and people aren't sure what the truth is.
Yeah, because us Taiwanese, we're really used to having a big international organizations trying to mute our voice because we're really used to it. Taiwan is not part of the UN or
any other major
international organizations.
Bodies, yeah.
And our government usually try to voice out our stance, or such as the WHO when the COVID-19 happened, we try to get first-hand information through the international organization, which is WHO, and a lot of time we were ignored. So for us, if the UN came out and say something, and our first reaction will be, something sketchy is going on. So I was really surprised that I'm sure journalists will have the skepticism over big international organizations like that, or it's still a respected organization. Yeah. We're just really curious because I think the context is really different.
I think there's a great amount of respect for the aims of the UN. I think, people widely agree with what they're trying to do in terms of alleviating world hunger. And I think, people don't want to jeopardize those aims. But now, this is my own analysis. This is my own sort of personal view based on my experience and based on the experiences of other journalists that I've heard about. I think the UN exploits that trust because its tactic when it gets critical reporting is to kind of guilt trip people and to say, you're jeopardizing our amazing work and really aggressively denying stories that are actually true. This hasn't just been my experience, but it's also been the experience of, for example, a colleague, Sally Hayden, who's done incredible reporting on Africa and particularly deaths, for example, in refugee detention centres. And, the denials by the UN of her stories have been incredibly aggressive and sometimes including that fake accusation. This isn't ideal for having the best outcome in terms of having a good organisation. A good organisation accepts when things have gone wrong and fixes it. It doesn't ignore or try to suppress when there are problems. And the UN, unfortunately, does seem to have that tactic. It seems to instead be more concerned about political management of communications and shutting down whistleblowers and critical information.
Well, because in recent weeks, we have seen articles like yours happen, or even today, this week, we saw how UN just kicked Russia out of the Human Rights Council. But in the end, everybody in the international community feels that UN is not doing enough to prevent tragedy from happening.
I mean, do you still believe that?
Yeah, after all your years in reporting on UN and these international bodies, do you still have faith in these kind of organizations?
The funny thing is I'm kind of a new reporter in terms of the UN. It's not typically on my beat.
Oh, sorry.
It's just that I happen to get this scoop. But I think what's happened is because of the invasion of Ukraine, there's been a belated reckoning with, whether these organizations the setup of them is compromised by the presence of authoritarian regimes that act according to the supposed aims of those organizations. So having things like having the Russia on the UN Security Council, I guess the problem of that became widely apparent when you have that country invading another one. And blocking the UN from taking action or making declarations about it. So it kind of became impossible to ignore. The wider story is about the backsliding of democracy. The number of democracies internationally has reduced in recent years. And this poses a really difficult challenge to what we call the post-war international order. All of the organizations that were set up in the wake of the Second World War with the idea of preventing future wars, they are trying to deal with the presence now of these increasingly authoritarian and unapologetically authoritarian regimes. So it's not just when it comes to China or when it comes to Russia, but it's also many regimes in the Middle East. There's kind of plenty to question and criticize about how they're accommodated in terms of their, record on human rights and so on.
Yeah, because You told us that last week you just went to a report on EU-China summit. That's another international body that can do very little. And we saw the result of the summit. A lot of people say it's kind of useless because China really just do what China wants. And all UN can do is just remind them that, hey, we're your trade partner. Please be nice. For you being on site, what was your observation of the summit?
Definitely. So we had the leaders of the two major EU institutions holding a remote conference with the Chinese leadership, the president and the prime minister. Yeah, I think this was a turning point. Previous to this, there was in the EU, and there continues to be to a certain extent, this hope that relations with China could be constructive on particularly issues like tackling climate change, and that economics and trade could be kept a bit separate from politics. And this war has kind of challenged that because China has taken an incredibly ambivalent position towards the invasion of Ukraine, and this is a problem for the EU. So the main demand of the EU in this summit was to ask Beijing not to allow Russia to use it to evade the sanctions that the EU and other Western countries have imposed on Russia. So not to, for example, sell them the key technological parts that they can't get anymore, or help its central bank to access reserves and stop its economy from feeling the full impact of sanctions. That was the main ask. It's unclear how much China has agreed to do this. Its position remains ambivalent, but at least according to the statements of its officials, they very much continue to sort of argue that this is a war of both sides. They describe it as two brothers fighting. They equate Ukraine and Russia when this is a case of one country invading another. So it remains a problem for the EU, but certainly there's been a hardening, I think, in the EU's position towards China, and nothing is normal anymore. I mean, I know you guys are really far away from this invasion, but just to describe where I am physically, right now I'm in Brussels. Our train network is connected to Ukraine. So the trains are full of refugees. They're physically here. You can see when you walk around the streets that people are flying the Ukraine flag. It's very much happening here, is the feeling. This is very much part of our neighborhood. It's Ukraine has a border which is open, basically, with several EU member states. So it's very much happening to us.
Yeah.
It's made it impossible to compartmentalize, I suppose, in the way that previous conflicts and previous situations could be sort of ignored. This one can't be.
Yeah, I think the way Taiwanese people associate us with the war is that when people would talk about, Ukraine today will be Taiwan tomorrow, because we face a really big threat from China, and they always fly a lot of fighter jets or planes towards Taiwan, and people could feel like if we couldn't stop Putin from invading another country, then maybe China, which is a really important ally of Putin, might think about doing the same thing. So that's why.
Yeah, we're just worried that this might set a precedent that if Russia faces no consequences, the rubles today has risen up to the level of pre-war. Their exchange rate is back to normal. So if none of the authoritarian countries that do bad things face any consequences, then what can the good guys protect themselves with in the future, right? That's what we're feeling. But
yeah, so the consequences would be the sanction. We feel like, do you think the sanction will work? Because according to the news that I saw these days, we feel like, the Russian currency is still strong and people still need their energy, and I don't think they are taking any consequences.
I think the main hope about the sanctions is that they can work more in the medium to long term, just like by a slow degradation of, the Russian economy, by not allowing it to have key technological parts and so on. I mean, the damage is definitely significant, and the sanctions that have been taken are pretty profound, and they were unthinkable until this happened, until weeks or months ago. Particularly the freezing of the Russian central bank's assets. It's true that Russia has mounted an economic fight back. They reopened their stock exchange in very controlled circumstances. That's prevented collapse. As you mentioned, with the ruble, they have done clever things like saying that they're going to insist on being paid for gas in rubles and a number of other very controlled measures which have artificially supporting the economy or the value of the currency. So at the moment, I mean, I think just now the EU has announced fresh sanctions which will ban coal. They may go further and ban oil. But yeah, it's revealed, what's happened is that it's revealed the stupidity of years of it building in economic dependency, particularly on Russian gas. Like the EU, some EU economies are dependent on it. It literally runs German factories. So if you cut off the gas, suddenly, Germany isn't going to have the money that it will need to, do other things, including, support Ukraine. Other countries don't have any other option apart from gas because they're landlocked and they can't easily bring in alternatives like liquefied natural gas. So it was a geopolitical trap that the EU walked itself into. And, they were warned. The countries that neighbor Russia, are, fellow EU member states, the Baltic states, Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they warned, don't do this, don't open new pipelines. And, it just wasn't listened to by the more Western countries.
Yeah. Sometimes Taiwan feels like we're one of those Baltic countries because we warn the world about China, say, hey, don't do so much trade with China because once you are hooked, it's hard to unhook yourself, But it's the same thing in Taiwan because we do a lot of trade with China. Only in recent years, we slowly try to decouple our economics with China. But speaking of China, though, we want to ask you about from the Irish perspective. What do you guys view China as? Do you view China as a valuable trade partner, ally, or just someone doing business with? Just very curious.
I think China in recent years has been viewed mainly as a big economic opportunity in Ireland. I think there are some really striking statistics about powdered milk, baby milk. That Ireland is like the number one supplier to China of that, that milk. I think that's true. Yeah. And, so for a country of our size, which is, we're like 5 million people, to be able to sell to a country so big, that poses, a potentially amazing economic opportunity.
Yeah, that sounds like Taiwan. That sounds like Taiwan. Yes.
The government would have seen it as its responsibility to open up opportunities, I think, for Irish business and support Irish jobs and so on. But like everything else, this is something which this is a sort of an attitude which has been challenged by this war, where we see the consequences of, regimes that don't respect international law, and that, it might seem like a good idea economically in the short term, but is it so wise in the long term?
Yeah.
So definitely it's being reevaluated. There's a whole debate. There's many people, I think, with different views about it. It's interesting that you mentioned the Baltic states and that you feel like a Baltic state, because I think there's a special bond between Taiwan and Lithuania. Yeah. That came up at the summit, actually. Oh. The EU asked China to drop its punishment to Lithuania because you probably know that Lithuania allowed a Taiwan diplomatic representative office to open in Vilnius, in its capital, and its name is very contentious. And Beijing got very, very upset, and Lithuania got delisted from their customs system, which meant that suddenly Lithuanian imports weren't recognized, and there's been this sort of retaliatory measure. So the EU asked for this to be stopped. It's interesting. Lithuania has a lot of bravado. It has a lot of bravado towards Russia and also in regards to China as well.
Yeah, because we see them we could not believe that Lithuania has stood up by Taiwan.
Yeah, because force doesn't serve the interest for them. Taiwan is so small.
Yeah, but we all see the consequences that they face, right? China heavily sanctioned their products. I think their export dropped by 90% or something like that from what I saw. So they, knowing the consequences, they still stood by their decision even today. That made me respect Lithuania so much.
This country is a relatively young country that has the experience of being ruled under the Soviet Union and winning freedom from the Soviet Union. They also are incredibly important in terms of supporting the opposition in neighboring Belarus. Belarus is like the only country that's kind of helping Russia militarily with its invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
It's ruled by a dictator called Alexander Lukashenko, and the opposition there is completely persecuted. But Lithuania has been sort of supporting them very, very strongly, and I think probably has been confronting the reality of the threat of authoritarianism much earlier than other EU member states because of this background.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah. So would you think that maybe Trump a few years ago did say something right about China? Well, people start to think about that.
Yeah, we're curious what Europeans think
Yeah.
about him right now.
There's definitely a distinction between the sort of Washington view of China and the view in the EU. So Washington, actually, the US administration is always pushing the EU to take a harder stance on China. And that happened again in regard to Ukraine. Actually, US President Joe Biden came over, and one of the topics of discussion was like, okay, let's get real with China, because the US has particular interests there. And the situation is that there are some in the EU that agree that, yes, that we should do that. Then there are others that don't. Others that think we need to forge our own path. We don't want to just copy what Washington does. We want to have our own independent policy towards China. And for us, China is a rival in some areas. This is the kind of thing that they say. Rival in some areas, a challenge in some areas, in other areas, a partner. And they always mention climate change. Like, we have to get China on board with climate change. And they're good at solar panels and all these kind of things. And, we've got to work together on that. And then, in terms of economic ties, there had been more positivity towards that in the past. But what happened was a load of Chinese investors and businesses got access to the EU, but then it wasn't reciprocal. So it wasn't easy for European businesses to do the reverse. And I think there was a bit of upset about that. That's delayed sort of further cooperation because it turned out not to be reciprocal.
Yeah. I listened to your podcast, and one of the episodes was talking about how Ireland wants to be neutral in terms of European conflicts, don't want to get involved, that kind of attitude. But after seeing in recent days, like the news of the city butcher, or the little town butcher came up, and all those horrific genocide pictures was revealed to the world. Do people in Ireland still feel that, hey, this is not our fight, we don't even want to get involved, not even want to donate weapons or anything like that?
It's a very contentious and difficult debate in Ireland, and it's sort of intimately bound up with our history. Ireland gained independence from Britain, from British rule, more or less 100 years ago. And in the wake of getting that independence, it was really important for the new Irish state to set itself apart from Britain. So to make its own foreign policy. And one of the key ways that happened was Ireland remaining neutral in the Second World War. For centuries, Irish troops had been the ones on the front lines of European wars, dying, and they didn't want that to happen anymore, and they didn't want the chaos, threat, conflict of the war to risk losing, actually, Irish independence. They were afraid that by getting involved in the war, they could end up being retaken by Britain or taken by Germany or something. So they decided to establish neutrality as a policy in that environment. In the decades since, it's a really contentious issue in Ireland. It's very, very politically sensitive. There's also, it's not very clearly defined what does neutrality actually mean. And I don't think that the level of public information about it is particularly good. So in Ireland, being neutral is often associated with no spending on military defence at all. That to buy so much as a plane or even a naval vessel is against neutrality, which it's not actually true, because if you can't defend yourself, you can't really be neutral, in fact. But it's a kind of like an awful debate. I think all countries have these where the quality of general information is very low. Definitely Ukraine has changed or introduced a bit of momentum and debate about all of this, because people feel really terrible about what's happening in Ukraine. And I think a lot of people can see the merit of discussing, is there anything we could have done to prevent this? Or, can we prevent more people being killed? And then the response, it's just difficult for the government to suddenly radically change a policy, Ireland wouldn't have very much to offer militarily. We do have, I think we have anti-tank missiles apparently that we could give to the Ukrainians. But taking such a step would require the government to sort out this very, very difficult domestic debate about it. So far, the response is we're not doing anything militarily. We're not going to give any arms. We're not even going to join any funding for arms. We keep totally out of that. But what we'll do is sort of like everything more, like if there's a step on the other direction, we'll go as far as we can. So they waived all visas for Ukrainians. They said, we will, host as many Ukrainians as want to come. We're neutral, but we're not neutral about this. You have our full sort of political support. We'll send medicine and, any sort of available step. They always call for more harder EU sanctions, Ireland. So that's the situation. It's probably not going to stop as a debate. I think it will continue. But it's very difficult, and there's a low level of good public information about it.
Are there Ukrainian refugees arriving in Ireland already?
Yes, I think we have, certainly 25,000.
Oh, wow.
That's a lot. It's far.
Maybe more.
Yeah, 25,000
They need
for
to
a country
take
with 5 million people.
Boats, right?
Yeah, they gotta go across the strait.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's really far.
Or planes. So Ukrainians are free to travel within the EU and stay within the EU. They've been given just like a temporary resident status, all Ukrainians. So they can come, they can work, they can get education, healthcare, everything, and they can go where they want in the EU. So if they choose to come to Ireland, they can.
But the UK is no longer in the EU, right? So do they need to pass through?
No, they just fly over.
Oh, okay, fly over.
It's not connected.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay, then sorry.
We have a border with the UK territory, but they actually are taking quite a different policy on this. They have a very bureaucratically difficult process for Ukrainian refugees to join them, so it's a little bit different. They went a different path from the EU. But yeah, there's a good few in Ireland already, but much fewer than in the countries that are closer to Ukraine, like Poland. Poland has I don't know how many now, but maybe 2 million or something like that, Ukrainian refugees. So there's a huge amount. So although it's quite a lot in Ireland so far, it's really nothing compared to other EU member states.
Yeah, you were just saying that Ireland actually is connected to another UK territory. That's North Ireland, right? And you say also Ireland went through a very difficult fight to gain your independence. Do people in Ireland have some kind of identity crisis or issues? Because for us Taiwanese, there are people who were originally born in Taiwan, but there are also people who retreated from China during the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s. Even now, today in Taiwan, there are some older generation or even younger generation people, they would identify themselves as Chinese. So whenever we talk about the issue between Taiwan and China, they would feel conflicted on the inside and they wouldn't know what to go with. Are there similar issues in Ireland?
The situation on the Ireland is a bit confusing, right? Ireland is the name for the whole island, but there's two jurisdictions on it. There's the state of Ireland, which calls itself Ireland, but is not all of the island.
Yeah.
It's the Republic that's independent and it's an EU member, and we use the euro as our currency. And then there's Northern Ireland, which is up in the northeast, and there's I can't remember the exact population, maybe 1.7 million, something like that. And they remain part of the UK, the United Kingdom. They're one of the constituent parts of it. And we have a big land border with them. We have free movement of travel between both the islands of Britain and the island of Ireland. So culturally close, very contentious history, lots of intermingling and movement and economic ties, made very difficult by Britain's decision to leave the EU, which kind of threw everything out into upheaval, and we had to sort of refigure a lot of things. But in the Republic, so in the independent Ireland, people are not so much conflicted about identity. It would be rare. I mean, there are British people who live in Ireland, but there wouldn't be people who are sort of thinking that the Republic shouldn't be independent or something like that. That's not really a view that you find at all. But in Northern Ireland, the society is very much split. There's a community which identifies as Irish very strongly, and a good number of them want all the island to be part of one united Ireland, and they don't want Northern Ireland to be part of the UK. And then on the other side, there's a strong also British community, a community that identifies itself as British, and they would tend to favour union with the UK, so remaining in the UK. And then you also have the complexities of people who identify not particularly as British or Irish, but as Northern Irish instead, so something unique.
more specific.
More specific, yeah. Or you could have a combination of the two. You could have sort of like, I'm British and Northern Irish, or even I'm British and Irish. There's lots of complexity. And the sort of the whole debate about whether this part of the island, what jurisdiction should it be in, this is a constant feature of politics in Northern Ireland all the time, and to a certain extent in the Republic, but less so.
Because we were made aware of this political party called Sinn Féin. And we actually read some of our friends from Ireland sent us some of the information about this political party, and we realized that this political party they want the Ireland to be united, right? If I'm not mistaken. So their political view towards China is very supportive, because I saw their politician talking about Taiwan, saying that hey, Taiwan is not a country; they should be united with China, because we feel like in their
unification.
I feel like in their view, unification is a good thing, but I feel like they forget to take into account of the unique certain circumstances of different regions. But so it's just like for us, it's very interesting to see all this different views from different people.
But maybe we are wrong. We probably ignore the complexity. Of Sinn Féin. So what would you say about that?
I think not just in Sinn Féin, but in left-wing parties in general in Ireland, there are probably a range of views, but there's a certain sympathy towards China, and I think there's an acceptance of the view of Beijing that China is I don't know how to describe it, but like an underdog. There's an identification of international underdogs, so that's like developing countries. Also, there's an acceptance of this view that like there's a struggle between the West and the like big bad America, the hegemon, and the plucky China is sort of standing up for this overweening power of the US and so on. So there's a certain sort of acceptance of that view in left-wing parties in Ireland. And then in terms of the like specific situation of Taiwan, it's I don't know if all of the parties have carefully worked out positions on it. I'd suspect that they don't. I think that in general, foreign policy and foreign policy issues in Ireland are very, very neglected in domestic politics. There isn't necessarily a very high level of knowledge about it. We don't have very many foreign policy experts in politics. Mostly they're people who are like hyper-local. Our politics favours people who are really involved locally. So like teachers and sort of local community organisers and local businessmen and things like that. Not necessarily people who live abroad or things like that. It's to do with how our voting system is set up that local support is incredibly important. So definitely foreign policy in general, I think there's low level of knowledge among the political class and probably not nuanced positions about it.
Oh, that's really
interesting.
That
really means you guys probably focus more on your domestic issues rather than, high-level international affairs, which you guys try to be neutral, maybe.
We just try to be, not offend anybody, just be like nice, peaceful, everybody can be our friend, try and be friends with everyone.
Sounds like
not
the
get
UN.
Into difficult issues. Not be part of invasions and stuff like that is, But that can come with sort of that, a position like that means you sometimes don't have to confront genuinely difficult questions. You don't have to make difficult choices, but we're small enough and sort of geographically isolated enough that I think we can kind of get away with that. Our main foreign policy sort of focus for so many years has just been Britain, what's Britain doing? How do we do this in regards to Britain and so on? And now it's like our position within the EU. The US is important for us because we have a huge diaspora there, and it's always, been a strong ally. But definitely going beyond Europe and the West, there's not necessarily well worked out positions, I don't think.
What's your personal view on how the Russian conflict is going to resolve in the future?
I don't think anybody knows that. What I can say is that it hasn't gone the way people thought it would go. Both the sort of, we can call the West, like NATO, the EU and so on, both the West and Russia, they thought the same thing at the beginning of this, which is that that Kiev would fall, that the Ukrainian government would lose control of the country, that it would not be in power in Kiev within a matter of days, because the size of the Russian army was so much greater than that of Ukraine. And that didn't happen. Kiev stands. The Ukrainian government is still in place. They've mounted this unexpectedly effective resistance. And Russia has suffered enormous losses that they finally a few government spokesmen have started to acknowledge. This means it's different. It's different from what people were expecting. And all of the West is trying to adjust now its response, because Russian forces have pulled away from the Kiev region, but they're clustering in the east of Ukraine areas, and in the south, areas which have borders shared with Russia. They can more easily hold those areas. They don't have to rely on supply chains, which has been a real weak point for them. And it seems like they're going to focus their efforts on gaining and keeping control of the Donbass region. And the Ukrainians predict that this will involve like a horrific war. They're saying it's going to be like an awful ground war, the likes of which we haven't seen in Europe since World War II. Tanks and all of that. So now it's like a scramble. It's a matter of days to see if the Ukrainian army can be supported with the weapons that it will need to sort of hold back that advance. So there's a big discussion now among all the Western countries about what military aid can be sent, what can we send, what would risk upsetting Moscow, and because they're really, really desperate that they don't get drawn into a direct conflict with Russia, NATO, because then, it would definitely be World War III, and their view is that the conflict could expand much wider and ultimately will end up with much more death than otherwise. So they feel a responsibility not to escalate, but then that sort of limits the help that they can give to Ukraine. It's a complex dynamic.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, nobody knows what's going to happen.
Yeah,
but
we
really respect what the Ukraine government and the people
we have
could
so
do.
much respect for Ukrainian government and the people there, and actually all the people, the surrounding country, the support that they gave to Ukraine was incredible.
I can't imagine like 2 million refugees coming to a country. That sounds like what happened to us in 1940s when 2 million of military people fled from China.
Yeah, and they retreated to Taiwan, but it's completely different situation.
Of course.
But just like, I can't imagine what Poland is like right now, with that many people needing help in the country. But do you know how many refugees are there in Belgium? Like, you're currently in Belgium, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the count is here.
But you can see on the people on the street just supporting Ukraine, right?
In the train stations particularly. A lot of people come by train. So at the beginning in particular, there was a huge rush. So I think we had like 200,000 people crossing the border into Poland each day. And then it slowed to like 40,000 a day, but it could increase again because a lot of people are leaving the Donbass region now. So I think the last count I saw was something like 4 million in total fleeing Ukraine, and many more displaced within the country. So very large figures. And it's definitely something that's visible. You do actually see these people. Their children are joining local schools. Lots of Ukrainian kids in Ireland certainly turning up in Ukrainian in Irish schools, and there's been a lot of initiatives to try and find housing, with people offering up spare rooms, or if they have an empty summer house or something like that, trying to find places for people to live. So there's definitely a sort of a public engagement, I suppose, and awareness of this, which has not been the case for other crises. And it's to do with number of things: enormous sympathy for Ukraine, the effectiveness of the Ukrainian government in communicating its position, which has been extraordinary, and also the fact that, this is a war that has a risk of escalating into a nuclear conflict. It's something that's happening on the territory of Europe, and it's a country that shares a border with the European Union and whose people already had visa-free travel to the EU. So there's never any question that they were going to come in and have to be, housed in the EU in enormous numbers.
Yeah, but I do have a question, because our main source of information is from Western media. And from what we have seen is that the Russian military was being really dumb, tricked by the people, and they were losing. They don't know what they're doing.
They even dug in the red forest in Chernobyl, right? They dug trenches in the red forest,
and a lot of people got sick.
They got radiation poisoning. but these are the news that we see. That we're like, okay, so Russians are not doing so well. But
and on the other side, the Ukraine military was doing great. They were like really brave. They know what they're doing. So I feel like as a journalist, how can we tell
if this is real or just Western propaganda? We don't know.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and it's obstructed by the fact that the situation is confusing. I think wars in general are confusing, and it's very difficult to get an accurate overview all the time when you have different situations going on in different zones. And even the Ukrainian government is cut off from the amount of what it knows about the territory of Ukraine, because some of it, parts of it are under Russian control. So we only found out about the extent of the atrocities once Russian troops withdrew from areas around Kiev, and then Ukrainian forces and journalists and independent human rights workers and things were then able to go into those areas and see what had happened. Apart from that, all we hear like hints from people who managed to escape, and there's they're unverified claims on social media, which is just it's incredibly difficult to verify. So you just have to kind of always be aware of the source of information. And something I've found useful is to see what is being both reported in Russian state media or pro-Kremlin media and coming from Ukrainian sources, because sometimes they actually agree on stuff. So they actually say the same things sometimes. They disagree on the motivation or the slant, but some of the main sort of facts that they describe are the same. So, for example, I did an article this week about that, and it was about how actually key details of the apparent atrocities that happened in Bucha were described also in Russian, pro-Russian media. So they described that there is a system of Russian soldiers going from house to house, searching for Ukrainians, and that they pick people out based on their documents and based on their tattoos. And the objective of this was to identify saboteurs, to identify people who are pro-Kiev government, and they're searched out according to visual cues. That this is something that matches exactly what Ukrainians have been saying. So it allows us to kind of bypass the very, very, what can we say, the crazy and ridiculous lies that the Russian government says all the time, and look at what they're actually communicating to their own citizens that agrees. Some of the claims, like the Ukrainian government said that just this morning that Russia has taken many, many children away, and that they're abducting children. And that's a kind of claim which you might think is exaggerated. But then if you actually look at pro-Kremlin media, they actually say the same thing. So they say, we took, I think it was 1,600 children. This was on a Russian state news agency from Ukraine, and another 63 from a train or something like that. So they say that Russian troops took away children, Ukrainian children. It's just they have a different explanation for it. They say that they were rescued, whereas obviously the Ukrainians say they were kidnapped. But we have Russian troops taking children according to both sides. So some of it you can sort of you can corroborate. And then I totally get what you're saying in terms of is the sort of success of the Ukrainian army being exaggerated? We have some facts. We have a Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said yes. They actually acknowledged that Russia had suffered enormous losses. Wow. So that was a first, because in general they don't say that. And we also know that the Russian troops tried to take Kiev, and they didn't. And then they pulled back, And now their forces are all clustering in the east.
Yeah.
So these are sort of facts. And they'll probably launch another assault. But that's sort of the prediction of Ukraine and of NATO, according to their intelligence. We can also say that, what they've said before has turned out to be correct. I mean, they said, Russia's going to invade. The Russian government said they weren't going to invade. But we can evaluate whose claim was true. So, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm just having a blast talking to you tonight.
It is something that's really hard for us to get, and we really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time, because for us Taiwanese, just like it's rare for us to have insights into international organization. Like your reporting gave us a lot of information and tickles our brain a lot, and all your experience just shed light on the issue. And thank you so much for sharing your time with us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for being direct and
and so sorry about the time difference messed up in the beginning. I'm so sorry.
If you do want to come visit Taiwan, please let us know. I love hiking too. So hopefully we'll have a drink.
And if we go to Ireland, we will definitely contact you.
Absolutely. Get in touch. Yeah, it was brilliant to join you guys. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. Thank
you. Good afternoon on your time.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.